today we have with us, like I said, Max and Robert. And so let's start out and identify. So Max, you were alienated from which parent?
Child. I was alienated from my father.
You were alienated from your father, and the alienator is your mother?
Yes, the
Okay.
mother.
Okay, and Robert, you were alienated from?
I was alienated from my mother.
Robert was
About
alienated
4.
from his mother, and the alienator was
My father and
Was-
my
was-
stepmother.
was his father and the stepmother. Okay, so thank you, Robert, for being here. Because a lot of the time, parents will say that there seems to be a bias, that a lot of people will say that most of the cases that they hear is that mothers alienate children from father. And so it's so important to have somebody like you here, Robert, because I want to make sure people know that this is not a gender issue. Both mothers and father get alienated from their children, and the alienators can be both father and mother. Okay, I see. I see question coming in. Thank you, you guys. I saw a great question from Emily about grandparents. Question from Nico. So thank you. Really, really good question. I'm gonna hope to address those soon. But let's cover the stories first so that we have a better background, and then we'll go in and answer questions for parents. Okay. So and then Jennifer said she was alienated. Jennifer, if you were an alienated child, I would love to interview you. Max, how old were you when it started?
I was roughly between the age of 4 and 5. That is the last time I have ever any recognition of my father. They were very vivid. There was one where he picked me up from primary school, and then there was one when he visited me at my home and brought me a dress. That is the last time that I ever seen him.
What about his parents?
Pardon?
When did you also get alienated from his parents?
I actually saw my grandmother a couple of times, but the rest of the family I didn't know. I only roughly met one of my dad's younger brothers in passing over the years. So I never got told anything about the family. So growing up, I felt like there was a big part of me missing.
So you said it started when you were 4, roughly. What's the situation right now? Have you reconnected?
No, because as I was, there was me and one of my siblings. We are full brother and sister. We grew up not knowing my father, and the mother, she made it perfectly clear how she felt about my father. So over the years, she was projecting her hatred onto me and my brother to the point where we automatically hated him, but not realising we didn't actually know him. But then in the next few years, my youngest brother came along. So it was all about the stepfather's family and my mother's family, and then there was nothing about my actual biological father.
Yeah, so that's a very common situation that we see, is that the alienated children are brainwashed and programmed with these messages. These are false narrative about the target parents. The target parents are being made to become like monsters. I had a post recently on Facebook where I asked parents about, what is the false or distorted beliefs that your children hold about you, and this shocking messages that people post on there. My children believe that I'm an alcoholic. I don't even drink. My children believe that I abandoned them at the hospital when, I never. It's just all this shocking story. And so thank you so much for sharing that. What about you, Robert? How old were you when this started?
I was 4, but it really started before the actual unforgivable incident, which in all alienation cases, there's going to be the unforgivable incident, which the alienated parent cannot ever be forgiven for. And that happened at 4.
4, okay. So you actually have a specific trigger event that ended that relationship, but it started before that. Okay, we'll talk about that in a second. But what about your relationship now? Have you reconnected with your mother?
That's interesting because, when you're alienated from your parent, you have this fear instilled. You know what I mean? Whenever they show up, the sirens go off, and they told us to hide in the back room and all this kind of stuff. You know what I mean? And so you have this fear instilled. And when I was an adult, I don't know how my mother found me, but she did. That's how love is, And she found me and she knocked on my door. And when she knocked on my door, I had so much fear instilled for me when I was a kid that I was afraid. And I didn't act appropriately. And I got to forgive myself for that. But later, I did reach out to her. And I talked to her, and I let her talk to her grandchildren. And I gave her a little love on the phone. And we were going to go see her for Christmas, but she died a couple days before we showed up.
I'm so sorry. Okay, so I hope parents hear this, because this is the thing. And you wonder why your children struggling, and you feel hurt and broken, and you feel rejected by your children. But understand, listen to this story. So Robert was just talking about how this fear was instilled in him. And it stuck, because once it's been instilled in the child child grow up, and you carry that fear with you, and it doesn't matter how unreasonable it is. I mean, he looks like a big and strong man, and yet he's scared of this now obviously an older lady who is his mother. It's not like she can beat him up.
She had nothing but kindness and caring.
Right, she was nothing but kind and caring, and yet he was carrying around this belief that she was scary, that he should be fearful of her. So I hope parents understand why your children behave this way, because your children have been brainwashed. Your children has been programmed to have this belief, and they hold this belief very strongly, and unfortunately that's the situation.
It's the teaching of conditional love is what it really boils down to. It's the teaching that you can love somebody, but if they don't do exactly what you think, if they don't live the way you want, if they are not under your control, then you can stop loving them. And then instilling that into your children.
Yeah. So Kathy in the comments said, I don't agree that there must be some unforgivable event. I think what Robert was talking about is, sometimes there's a particular trigger event, but sometimes it may not be obvious, but children, because these are false narratives that the children are holding about you. And in order to reject you, and in order to be okay with rejecting you, the children must justify it in themselves. And they may not realize it, but subconsciously, they justify their behavior by looking at certain things that you do or say, and say, yeah, this is why I don't have a relationship with my mother or my father. I don't want anything to do with him or her, because he or her don't deserve forgiveness, because, whatever it is. And your children have to justify their behavior, because otherwise the children would not be okay with their own life, because we are human beings. We do have to be okay with our behaviors. Everyone likes to think of themselves as reasonable, loving, caring human beings. And so your children, in order to, and especially with the support of the alienators, who is their parents, who they, believe and trust. So together with that, they have to come up with this list of unforgivable traits or events in order to be okay with not seeing you again.
There has to be a justification for the judgment.
Right. So Max actually covered a little bit of that. Max was saying how her mother was making her father look like a monster, saying how he was horrible and things like that. Max, could you talk a little bit more specifically about this? What kind of things that your mother said about your father, and how much of it did you believe and how much of it you didn't?
It was basically an abusive relationship. And I got told the story when I was, there's basically 3 years between me and my middle brother. And when my mother was pregnant with my brother, he apparently pushed her downstairs. She lost a couple of teeth. I had to stay at my grandma and granddad's while she went in hospital. then there's been times where, well, there was a time where I got told he was actually diagnosed as paranoid schizophrenic. That is when I was 15-year-old. And there's just stories like that. And as I've gone into my adulthood and got older and matured, like, I can see things basically falling into place, because I'm having the same treatment now with my own children. So that now has led on to my grandchildren.
Yeah, so what Max experienced is very common and actually very similar to my situation, as in my mother said, you know, my father cheated on her. He didn't want anything to do with us. He didn't care about us. He was a monster. A lot of it was kind of vague though. And I actually never met my father. So it's easier to paint that picture because I have nothing to validate or invalidate that.
But it still follows the same storyline.
Yeah, what about you, Robert? Like, what was told about your mother, and tell us about that unforgivable event.
Well, first, you know, they judged my mother because, you know, they were in Germany. My dad was in the military there in Germany, and it turns out, as I learned about the past, that he's sending letters to his best friend's wife, telling her that her and him should be together. And he's mad at my mother for having me, you know what I'm saying, and my brother and sister. And so she's like going into depression because she's in a foreign country, in Germany, with this guy who's mad at her for getting pregnant and sending letters to some other woman. And so then he gets upset, and I don't really know what happened, but evidently somehow there was some impropriety. But that's people. So they go to where they need to have some love when they ain't getting any. But anyway, so then she ends up back in Texas with us, and he's not helping. And I remember, because all me and my brother and my sister, we remember tasting coffee toast. That's what we lived on, was coffee toast. She'd take bread and pour some coffee over it because we didn't have any money to eat. And she worked at some milk place. I don't know. I was under 4 here, but I remember this pretty clearly. And we'd always hope that she'd come home with chocolate milk. You know what I mean? But anyway, so she's starving to death with 3 children, and he's judging her and not helping. And so she sends us to her aunt, right, to stay with her aunt, who's in the same town, and to go chase after some guy who she thinks will save the day. You know what I mean? And you got to realize the time back then. It was when I'm 4. So she's looking for some guy to save the day, and then they basically send us to his parents, and we're to only see our mother 2 times again in the rest of her life. And here's the horrible thing about it, and you're going to find this is true in most cases as well, is that then the world judged her for being depressed. You take a woman's 3 children away from her and not let her even see pictures or talk to them, and then judge her for being depressed. What kind of a being does that?
Right, and that's very common. This is what a lot of targeted parents experience, is that they being, you know, when going through the custody battle, they being judged as being depressed, like you said, because, I mean, obviously, you're going through this highly turmoil situation. You got this high conflict situation with an alienated. Alienators are never easy. They are there to destroy your life, essentially, the targeted parents.
They're always right.
Right, and they're doing everything to destroy you, and they take the children away from you, and then yet you are not supposed to feel emotionally affected by this. And if you are, then your emotional behavior or feeling are being judged as somehow inappropriate, that you are not a suitable parents. And like I saw Kathy in the chat room said, yeah, they claim that we are unstable. Elena, hi, nice to meet you. Thank you for being here. Yeah, I see a lot of comments and questions. Thank you so much. And we're going to try to go into the question and comment soon. But yeah, this is a very common situation that targeted parents experience, and it's completely ridiculous and unfair.
And what people have no concept of is that the alienated parent is not only dealing with the grief of of their child being alive and not being in their life, but also about being gaslit and having that relationship and knowing their child's being abused at the same time, and then having people judge them for being emotional about it. People have no concept or empathy except when they've walked the path like you have, my dear.
Yeah, and this is why I actually had an event where I talk about this, how this is a multi-level, it's systematically attack on the target parents, because you're being attacked at so many levels, like you just said. You're dealing with the grief of losing your children. You're being directly attacked by the alienators who, verbally, physically, financially, abuse you in so many ways, and they smear and brainwash the public. So your friends and family going against you, the system going against you, and then you're financially broken because you're being dragged through courts, and you're already heartbroken. It's just really the struggle that target parents have to deal with is crazy.
Parental alienation is linked in with narcissistic abuse. So if you're involved in a narcissistic abusive relationship, you're 99.9% at higher risk of going through parental alienation, your child and the parent. By the time the targeted parent realizes what's going on, it is too late.
Right. Yeah. And a lot of parents don't even know what they were dealing with. I mean, actually, before this call, Robert and I just had a conversation. I was talking about my case, like, I didn't know what I was going through. I mean, the parents had no idea what they were going through. And then as children, they had no idea that they are victims. Nobody except the alienators is out there, like winning, destroying everyone around you. And you are thinking that something is wrong with you. As a victim, you had no idea what you're dealing with, and you think that your experience is completely isolated, that nobody else is experiencing this but yourself. But in fact, this is such a common thing.
It's so common. Here's how common it is. Okay, after I became aware, and we talked about how we become aware earlier before we got on this. But after I became aware, I realized that my stepmother was alienated from one of her parents. Every single one of my brothers and sisters was alienated from one of their parents. This is so common. The only person that wasn't alienated from a parent was my father. But then I said, there's got to be a root, because this is a toxic thing that comes from roots, you know what I mean? And the root was his father alienated his family. I don't know what happened there, but somehow he was taught conditional love for his grandparents, and then that was the root. So there's always a root. This is a toxic thing. This is not something that is anything but a virus.
Yeah, it is definitely a generational thing. And then because your children experiencing parental alienation, they are going to grow up with dysfunctional relationship, and they themselves are going to end up being either the target parents or the alienated children, and then it pass on to the grandchildren. So you have the power and the choice to stop it with you. You have the power to stop it with you and fight for your children and get your children back so that it doesn't keep going on and destroying your family life.
You know what the toxin is called? I have a label for it. It's real easy. It's called conditional love. This whole toxin is the teaching of conditional love and the breaking of normal, healthy, unconditional love attachment. And so conditional love is the toxin.
Yeah, that's very true. And actually both Max and Robert was talking about the conditional love. So what it is that the children know that you love them unconditionally. And at the same time, the alienators' love for the children are conditional. Does that mean that the children know that if the children don't behave according to what the alienators expect, the children's going to be punished in some way? It could be by withholding of love. It could be even more serious in terms of physical abuse. It could be abandoned, all that kind of things. So the children knew that if the children did not behave, the children would be punished by the alienators. And at the same time, the children understand that your love for the children are unconditional, meaning it doesn't matter how the children behave, you still love your children. So now stuck in the middle with that kind of choices, that's what the children do, is the children choose to be safe. And that's why they abandon you, because they know you're still going to love them, and they wanted to be safe with the alienators. But obviously that doesn't keep them safe. Okay, so let's talk about the experience growing up without one of the parent, with, you know, being alienated, and while your childhood is colored with this monster parent in your life. Max, what was it like growing up, feeling like, you know, you don't have a good father, that your father was a monster?
I felt it was more shame that I felt more than anything. But the older I got, I realised that was between the mother and the father. That had nothing to do with me. He never harmed me in any way, shape, or form, as far as I can remember. So now it's just like, it's difficult because there's still a lot of me what's missing. Over the years, I got in contact with an half sister, and I found out off the family that apparently my father had an affair with a lady. So there was 6 months difference between me and my sister. So I got to know her, but unfortunately the relationship broke down. But other than that, I've got no part of my father whatsoever.
So Max felt ashamed. And how were you as a child? Like, were you doing okay with school?
No,
No.
I was targeted, I was bullied, I was withdrawn. I was always a very, my mother used to always call me oversensitive all the time, but all I was doing was reacting to abuse at home, bullying at school. That led on to abusive relationships the older I got as an adult.
Yeah.
And that's when I got involved with people on the narcissistic spectrum. So it just escalated from childhood all the way up to my adulthood, until I started healing 7 years ago. And that's when I started doing research on narcissistic abuse. And then the more in depth I was going with narcissistic abuse, I stumbled across parental alienation. So I was in my late 30s when I actually got to know about parental alienation. So since then I've been researching, but unfortunately it affected my children. So they're all grown up now. So by the time I got to really understand what parental alienation, it was too late for me and my children, because mine and my 3 children's relationships had already broke down.
Is that when you realized that you were alienated as a child?
Yeah, things started to fall into place. The
Okay.
more I progressed into research.
Yeah.
So my main objective was, it was basically an ex-partner, an ex-abusive partner. I started researching.
Yeah.
And I got told about narcissistic abuse with a lady that I used to know. And then I just did constant research after research.
Yeah.
And the more I did, the more the pieces fell into place.
Yeah. What about you, Robert? What was it like growing up without your mother?
Well, they were extremely effective. Basically, it was like she didn't exist. Except when she tried to show up, which she didn't do too often because they were punishing what she did. But ultimately, I didn't even realize that I was alienated. My brothers and sisters, which are older than me, still refused to recognize they'd been alienated from her. But it was really, they were extremely effective at making it so I had nobody. They didn't show up for my parents were the kind where I was class president. I was, successful in band, and I went to Quad State in band, well, not band, but in choir and in football and everything. And I had never had my parents show up to one event. They showed up to all my stepsisters' events, but they never showed up to one of mine. But as far as my mother goes, yeah, as far as they were concerned, her, my grandparents, anybody on that side of the family didn't exist in the world anymore.
Right. So yeah, that's the thing. Targeted children have been what is stolen from them, not just the target parent, but the whole entire half of the family, the whole entire half of their identity.
I didn't tell you, but the gift of when my mom died was I got to meet my granddad. I spent a week with him. I learned so much about who I am. People are wrong to steal that from us.
Very, very, very much so. So you see, and I'm so sorry for your situation. So you see with Max, the situation is that it impacted her as a child. So it's visible. She was bullied. It was obvious that she was not doing well as a child. Robert, on the other hand, it's invisible. People think that he was fine. He was a class president and all this stuff. So people look at him as a totally functioning child, and people don't even see the brokenness inside, the suffering that he was going through. And so I was actually like Robert. I was, always the school president, the school captain. I was always doing well. I was always, straight A kind of student. I never misbehaved. So when people look at me, they think that I'm totally functioning, like actually a very well functioning child. So that's the thing, is society overlook this, and for judges, sometimes they will look at the case and see the child is doing well, at school and extracurricular activities with sports and arts or whatever, and then they say, well, the child is fine with the alienators. They don't realize the damage and not just the short term but the long term impact on the children. And you can't look at the child. The point here is you can't look at the child and judge the situation, because there's so much underneath that you don't see. So Max started to cover the impacts of the long-term situation, which is, for her, it translates into adulthood, where she continued with this dysfunctional relationship. She ended up continuing in cycles of these relationships where she continued to be the victims. What
because
about...
she was taught conditional love, and so when she went out into the world, that she looked for somebody who loved her based on conditions. And then she found the narcissist, because that's what narcissists do. They find someone looking to be loved by conditional love. And so we've got, the only way we break this, if you want the inoculation, is to truly just buckle down and try to learn how to unconditionally love again.
It was basically because I had a very controlling mother. So because I was used to them toxic energies, that's where I felt the most comfortable. So until I
conditionally loved yourself.
Pardon?
You conditionally loved yourself.
Yes,
as soon as you learn how to unconditionally love yourself, you have the keys to the kingdom.
Well, that's what I had to do, because to heal from narcissistic abuse, you have to peel back a lot of layers. So it can take years and years and years of healing from narcissistic abuse. So what I have done over the years, I've poured all my passion, my positive energy into my own business, which then I educate and support other survivors of narcissistic abuse. So I've done...
Evil.
Yeah, so this is
you learned that the gift is in the giving, baby. Bless you.
Yeah, so this is actually a very good story here. And I mean, I see Amy in the chat room said such a sad situation. We saw Jennifer said so sad. Kathy sending heart. And then...
all three of us on here have turned our hardships into nurturing others on the path. I also nurture people with afewsecrets.com as well, just like the two of you nurture other people. And that's what I'm learning, is that the people who go through the hard things in life, we can either let it destroy us or we can let it become a gift that we give to other people.
Right, exactly.
With our empathy.
Yeah, so we actually have a very good situation here. What you are seeing here is three of us who are adult, and now as adult, actually all three of us are very active in helping other victims. Actually, each of us have our own initiatives. You're familiar with my work. Robert also have his work where he help other people that dealing with parental alienation. Max just talk about her work helping with narcissistic victims, and that's the thing. Things can be good. It may take time. Things may not go back to the way it was, but it can be a lot better. So really hold on to that hope. So let's talk about so we talk about the short-term impact, like what it was like as a child. And Robert didn't see it. Max saw it. And now let's talk about the long-term impact. Max talked about this dysfunctional relationship. What about you, Robert? How did it impact you in the long term?
Well, somehow when I got to 18, I realized that my parents weren't going to be a positive influence in my life. And so I moved out the day I turned 18. That was my gift for myself. And so I struggled along, but still what I carried with me, this was the baggage, was I carried with me this one day of hope that my parents would see me with pride and that they would show up. And it took me a long time not to find that, but here's the thing that destroyed my relationships and my happiness, and it was my fault because it's my perspective. But my perspective was based in this conditional love, where I was always looking for somebody to love me for the things I did or the money in my pocket. And my family was always this way. Whenever we saw each other, they were always like, report out. It's like, I make this much money and this is my job and this is how happy I am. You gotta love me for my condition. And so it took me a long time to come out of that. But as many of us have found, we found partners that loved us based on conditions. And when we got in those relationships, we found out that they didn't love us for us and we couldn't even be us. And I lost myself in one of those relationships. And then I found myself with my Heavenly Father's grace. And now I nurture others.
So Robert also experienced something like Max, and actually I experienced the same thing. Is I also grew up and ended up in cycles of abusive relationship, because you grew up with abuse and that looks like love. You seek for familiarity. You think abuse is love, and then you just end up with that kind of abusive relationship, and then it just keep going and it keep going until it pass a sort of a there's some point when it become too much, right? It's like a breaking point. It's like I don't know the term for it, but then that's when it break down, and then that's when you realize what happened. And so with Max, she became aware when she became an alienated parent herself. What about you, Robert? When did you realize?
Yeah, when I ran into the most alienating parent on the planet. I've studied it now, and I found the worst one. But I'll use it as a blessing for others.
Yeah, Frederick, thank you. Yes, the tipping point. Exactly, that's the word I was trying to figure out. Thank you so much. Yeah, so for me, it was actually one of my relatives actually hinted to me that something happened in my childhood, that my mother has done something to interfere with my relationship with my father. That's when I realized. Now, for Robert, his mother actually turned up and really continued to try to look for you and try to reconnect.
I talked to people that lived around her, and she was one of the kindest people they knew.
Right. And then with you, Max, did your father try to reach out to you?
As far as I'm aware, no. I got told a story that when I was 16-year-old, he came up to visit my grandma and my granddad because they'd had some altercations, they'd had a few disagreements. And I got told that my granddad basically ran my father out of town. So I don't know whether that was true or not. All I got told off from his grandma was he wasn't interested in you and Andrew. He just wanted to see granddad.
I'm sorry. Is he still alive? Or?
My granddad?
No. Your father.
Or my father? Well, no. I got told off my half sister. This was just after my mother dying, so it was not last November, the November before. The mother passed away with cancer, and then a few months later, out of the blue, I get a text off my half sister saying that she'd reconnected with our father. He was in an hospice, and he died of cancer. I had no proof of the death. I had no proof of the funeral. I had nothing. That's all I got told. So in my gut feeling, I think my sister was lying.
So here's the thing. Actually, a lot of parents don't realize this, and you wonder why your children don't talk to you or don't reach out to you, even when they become adults. It's a lot of the time, the alienators will lie to the children and say that you are dead. And like Max just talked about her stories, she doesn't even know now if her father is really alive or dead, and there's no way for them to find this information. So actually, your effort of reaching out to your children is so important. Really, don't ever give up on your children. And we have done events where we talk about how to reach out to your adult children. So look for those videos. But we're going to do more events and show you how to reach out to your children, even when your children refuse to talk to you. So Cheryl said yes, they do. Jennifer said that story sounds like BS. I can't imagine him not trying to reach out to you. So sad that she will never know, and no knowledge is so painful. And yes, that's the thing. It's your children, and then you wonder. A lot of parents said, "Oh, my children are adults now. They should know better." No, they can't. There's no way for them to know better. There's no information. There's no access. There's no way for them to know better.
That with the work that I'm doing, that is my way of trying to reach out to my children. So the more I educate, the more video content I do, I'm hoping that they come across that and they see it, so that is my way of trying to reach out. Because what gets to me the most is, even though they're adults now, my fear is if I try to reconnect with my children now, they're going to get manipulated more, which then will go on to my grandchildren. So it's a catch-22. What do you do? So this is my only way of reaching out.
Okay, so Jennifer said that, so her situation is that she's being blocked by the whole family and there's no access at all. Cheryl said...
Definitely a sign of parent alienation.
Yeah.
When a whole family side gets blocked out, you got a toxic situation going on, no doubt. And anybody says anything different is completely wrong.
Right. Cheryl, talking about parental alienation needs to be taught in schools for sure. So that's why we're working on a flyer for educators. A flyer that we wanted to make a flyers that parents can sort of just distribute that among school, and hopefully the teachers will pick up some of it. The staff member will see it, because this is the thing. Parental alienation is so widespread, and everybody has seen it. Now, when I talk to anybody, really, almost everybody will say, "Oh yeah, I know so and so with this situation," or "I experienced this situation." Almost everybody has seen this, and yet it's like the biggest elephant in the room. Nobody actually.
That's because there's always a beautiful excuse. There's always a beautiful reason why that person deserves judgment, and you deserve to have your relationship with them destroyed. And when we stop letting that happen, we stop letting people, 99.9%, I believe, this is my personal belief, not a statistic, but 99.9% of people who have a child and do not allow the other parent to have a relationship with them are a parent alienator and a child abuser, and they need to face that fact and start realizing they're living with judgmental love, and so they're toxic because only hurt people, and they are teaching it to our children, and we have to be cycle breakers. We have to be cycle breakers. The only way you're going to break the cycle is if you're in it, and if you're in it now, break it.
Amen to that. I agree.
So I'm a little passionate about this topic and about the world, because here's the thing. I want to tell you a little snippet of my perspective is that the entire world has been gaslit against our Heavenly Father. We have been alienated against Him, and settle into that for a minute.
Max, you were saying something?
No, I was just agreeing. I was agreeing with John.
Yeah.
We have to be the ones that are the cycle breakers.
Yes.
I'd advise any parent, if they've got any gut feeling whatsoever, you've got to catch the children at a young age. If you spot any signs, any symptoms, research. Do a lot of research, because it kind of saved my sanity. I thought I was going crazy, like you said, Petra. I thought there was something wrong with me. So in my opinion is if you've got any gut feeling, just research, just look
Yeah.
it up, you know, and that to me, that helped me a lot.
Anybody, let me just say a word for you, baby. Anybody from that other side of the family, that other genetic family that you can reach out to, go touch base with them, because you're going to learn some things about yourself, just like I did for my grandfather. And I can't explain how it happens, but you deserve that. Give yourself that gift.
Yeah, so I saw a comment earlier where someone said that they don't have any access whatsoever. And then also somebody else comment about how today we in the information age. So there's a lot of access to information, you know, on social medias, and your children are very, you know, technology conscious. So your children are fully aware of social media and things like that. So with my personal story, my father, by the time that I realized this, my father had passed. And for people that are familiar with my story, I've shared this before. What helped me with my healing as an alienated child is that I actually found a website that my father left behind for me with diaries and
How beautiful is
letters
that?
and just a lot of things that helped me heal, because I could see that he loved me, that he was there for me, that he didn't abandon me, that he wanted me, and he forgave me, and just all
That's
this.
a beautiful thing.
Yeah, so
Beautiful thing.
so it's the biggest part in my healing. So I wanted to say to parents that even you don't have access, because my father did not have access, especially today with social media, is for you to keep a very big social media footprint. And what's important is to keep a very positive social media footprint. You don't want to have an image where your children look at it and feel ashamed. You don't want your children to look at it and see you as just totally emotionally unstable or, you know, destructive in any way. You know, so you want to keep a very positive social media footprint, so that when your children do reach out, and they do, because someone said they noticed that their child was checking out their Facebook once in a while. So you want to make sure that your children, when they look at you, they find someone that they want to be with, someone that they're proud of, because it's you think of any relationship, you want to be with someone that you're proud of, you want to be with someone that you admire. So be that parent. I know that you're broken, that you are hurt, but you have to do this for your children. This is not about you. So really pull it together.
Because I have.
Yeah. So
That's how I look at it. We gotta live by example. We got out of that relationship for a reason, so that you can live your best life. You gotta live your best life as an example, and let them see it until the day you conceive them.
exactly, you have to live your best life, even if you don't have your children, because how can you be ready to have your children back? It's not something that you can turn on instantly. You have to live your best life now, so that when you can get your children back, you can be there for your children. You can be whole and happy and full for your children, because your children are gonna, if they do come back, they're gonna be very broken. They're gonna need you to be full. Yeah.
Without question.
So I saw a lot more question in the comment.
Thank you for the story about your dad's website.
No, thank you. So yeah, actually, so because of what happened, because of what my dad did for me, one of the things that I said to parents is always, even if you do have contact with like some parents are not fully alienated, as in they still have contact, but the children are defiant or the children are rude and cold. So no matter what, one of the things I would advise for parents, whether you have contact with your children or not, is to create at least one video. If multiple is good, but at least create some video for the what if scenario. Meaning, let's say if your child finally understand what happened, but you're no longer around. So have it somewhere in a way that your children can access it, that you can tell your children, so that if it was your child's wedding, if your child has their own children that you can't be there, think about what kind of message you want to tell your child in those times, or at the time that your child is experiencing a tough time and you want to be there for your child. So do a video somewhere and maybe post it on YouTube is free. Post it somewhere, and it doesn't have to be public. You can post it unlisted, but figure out a way so that your children can find it when they need to. But create a what if video. Like this is your legacy for your children. This is not for you, but it's for your children. The other thing I would say is I've noticed that anyone that using Gmail, I've noticed that Gmail has a new function where it allows you to schedule an email. So you can actually write an email to your child and schedule it maybe for their birthday 10 years from now. And
Oh, that's a really cool idea.
Or think something like that. So think about ways that, and then, ways that you can reach out to your children just in case that you cannot be here, but you can still be there for your children.
Technology is a beautiful thing if we use it right, isn't it?
Right. Okay. So let's.
My parent and your parents didn't have that tool to leave us those breadcrumbs.
Right. Okay. So let's go through the question, and parents, let me know when you have more questions. I'm gonna go through the question in the chat room if I can. Cheryl said, "My experience is never to give up and to drip love, and that the children are trapped." Yes. Okay. Jennifer agreed that this situation is really bad. Okay, Crystal said, has anyone experienced or heard of the step parents adopting the child at 18? That is what I'm told and will happen, and my oldest will be 18 in July. Courts have been delayed 3 times. I feel time is limited. Years and generation will pass, and yes, my whole family and his last year. Okay, so Crystal, with your child being almost 18, clearly your child is going to be out of the court system. So, whether court delay or not, it's not going to have a lot of impact now. I mean, July, you were talking about a few months away. It doesn't matter what court decision is, that decision is going to expire very quickly. So let's put that aside. There are things that I would say are beyond our control. So your child, when your child become an adult, it be beyond your control if your child get adopted by someone else, because as an adult you get to choose. You can get adult adoption is a legal thing, and you don't have any say in it. But don't let that impact. And yeah, it's very unfair. I'm not saying that this is the right thing. It's unfair, but don't let that impact the process that you do to get your children back. And this is the same with all parents out there. And parents will constantly contact me and say, oh, he files this or she files this false allegation, or there's a CPS call, or there's this adoption situation, and my child's this and that. You have to deal with the day-to-day, meaning that if there's a court hearing, you have to prepare and fight for it. But the whole process of getting your children back is not a one-day thing. It's not a short-term thing. It's a whole campaign that have taken a long time to get to this point where the children are alienated. To reverse that is going to take a whole process. So you have to think of this whole process, and don't let anything affect that. Whether some activity, something, it's just part of alienation. The reality hasn't changed. It may sound worse, but the reality is that you are alienated. That's part of being alienated. So don't let that somehow destroy you or affect you in any way, but make sure that you shelter yourself and your love from your children from anything that's going on. Like Robert was talking about, like Max was talking about, you have to make sure you are strong, doing research, and then build this whole strategy of how to fight your children back, and don't let anything affect that, because that's a long-term process. It's not a one-day thing. Okay, let's go on. I mean, do you guys want to add anything to that before I go on to other questions?
No, fine.
Okay. Jennifer said, it's so good to be acknowledged, but it's so painful. It's like listing faith all again. Yes, it's very, very painful.
The grief. You froze on me. The grief, I think, is what we're touching on here, and I think that's an important topic, because there's no grief like grieving your living child and knowing that they're being emotionally abused by somebody who they trust. And here's the thing, is that we can take everything and we can make it a gift if we try. But the first thing I want you to do is I want you just to validate that that's a real feeling and that it's okay for you to feel it, and you're not crazy for grieving like some people might judge you for. And I want you to just sit in that. And if you feel like crying, I want you to just cry. Cry as hard as you can and feel it because it's valid. And then once you're done crying, then I want you to find your strength. And I want you to find out how that just made you stronger and how more you're going to stand for unconditional love and stand against the conditional love that is trying to destroy our world.
Actually, let's talk about, you mentioned about the guilt. Let's talk about the guilt. I wonder if you guys feel guilty when you realize that you were alienated as children. Do you Max,
Yeah.
how did you feel when you realized that?
I felt guilty. I felt ashamed. I felt like I was a failure to my children, that I didn't protect them enough.
No. Like when you realized that
As
you
a
were
child.
alienated as a child
Oh,
from your father, how did you feel?
ashamed, and like I said, a part of me was missing. I never experienced a father's love. So growing up, I had what you class as daddy issues.
Yeah.
So all I got to know was my stepfather, and he was very abusive. So it wasn't unconditional love. It was like the stepfather came along and me and my brother got pushed out. And then it was all about my youngest brother after that when he was born.
So her father was replaced with this abusive stepfather figure, and
Yeah.
Robert's mother was replaced with a stepmother, right?
Right.
And
Yeah.
that's the thing. This is what they do: is they replace you, the target parents. They remove you from the child's life, and then they attempt to replace it with somebody else, a stranger, who doesn't have your children's best interest in mind, and then place them and expect the children to look up to and love this stranger who doesn't really care about them.
Right, and the stranger walks into the situation with the alienated parent already being labeled and judged. You know what I mean? So the stranger walks in and goes, okay, well, they're labeled and judged. And they just go along with that. So we could judge the step-parent. But in truth, the step-parent walked into the situation as it was.
Right, and then a lot of the times step parents will buy into the story because they only have one side of the story, so they only
Right, they're
hear
never
that.
going to get the other side.
Exactly.
Why
And
would
then-
they want it?
And then sometimes there's also ego too, because they now suddenly winning. They suddenly get to be, put on the pedestal as, see, not even my child, and yet this child loves me or look up to me, right? There's that ego boost. So then it's actually incentivize them to participate in the alienation.
Right, because what do they have to benefit if your alienated parent suddenly becomes important to you?
Exactly. Right. So that's, but how did you feel, Robert, when you found out that you were alienated from your mother?
Angry, really angry, and then I try to approach everything with love, kindness, and caring. So I immediately talked to my father about it, and what really made me even more upset, less angry, just upset, was the fact that not only him, but my sisters and brothers, nobody wants to see it, and yet it's as plain as the smile on your face. And that hurt more than anything, is that nobody wants to see it. It's easier not to. It's not that they don't know it's real. It's not that what I said wasn't true. It's just that it's easier not to. And that's the way the devil wins, isn't it? When it's easier not to.
So you were angry, and then you also talk about when you get to meet your grandmother in your mother's side, you started to learn a lot
granddad, yeah.
about
Oh
yourself.
yeah, I learned so much about the way I just think as a person. It was incredible. I met me for the first time. In my family, I always felt like I must have ran into like some comet or something and got changed because I didn't know who the fuck this family was. You know what I'm saying? everybody was just not me. And when I met my granddad, I met me. What a beautiful day. That was a gift. That was a gift from my Heavenly Father, for sure.
So what has been stolen from you is your identity for most of your life.
Right.
That was stolen from you. So you talk about talking to your father when you realize it, and then they just kind of deny it and they refuse to.
Judge. He judged me. He called me a free spirit, as if that's a bad thing.
Right, exactly. So when adult children, that's the thing it is so important for target parents to understand, is that your children have been indoctrinated all of their life, so it's very unlikely for them to be able to stand up against the alienators, even as an adult.
I'm an adult. I'm 50 years old when I approached my dad, and he still rejected me. Hasn't talked to me a day since. What do you think those little children are going to deal with if they try to stand up for their parents?
Right. Yeah. So that's the thing, is like, even as adult, you can't stand up to the alienators. So that's the situation that Robert talked about. And this is the thing, when you have trauma and you have this painful feeling and it's being invalidated, it's actually caused more pain, because in order to heal trauma, you have to be able to go into it and get validation, get a sense of understanding, and that's how you start healing. But because you're being invalid, it's like they continue this trauma and continue to make you suffer. Now, so for my case, when I stood up to the alienators, guess what? There's a whole campaign of attack launched at me.
Yes, it's very common. It's the smear campaign.
Yeah, see, you guys see, both Robert and Max, this is what we're experiencing. So think about your children, even as adults, how difficult it is for them to reach out to you, because even though they are adult, they are still under this control of these alienators. And it's very scary.
Years of ingrained fear and anxiety associated with you.
Exactly, yeah. So it's very scary. And for me, really, like, to fight, like, once I stood up to my alienator and confronted her, and the campaign that she then launched against me, I have to tell you, like, those was the worst years of my life. I mean, I grew up with the abuse that she launched on me. Like, I grew up with, being sexually molested as a child and being physically abused consistently as a child, but nothing compared to being an adult and realize that half of your identity and half of your life has been stolen, and the other half is a lie.
Right.
You had nothing. Essentially, as an adult, you had nothing. Yeah, you're essentially,
you had to find who you really were again.
Exactly. You are an orphan all along. Really, because you have been taken away from a loving parent and placed in an abuser hand, and you grew up in this false narrative, and it just, it's crazy. So anyway, let's check the more questions, because I know there's a lot more comment. So Jennifer said his dad wants it that way. It's very common. Dina said there's a video on YouTube talk about narcissistic abuse. It says something like narcissist infiltrates your mind or something like that. And it's just shy of an hour of one of the most helpful videos that I've watched. He explains how it happens, and it's very enlightening. Yes, there's a lot of resources about narcissistic abuse that can be really helpful, because when you look into it, you'll realize that's what you're going through. Jennifer says they actually love the drama. They thrive on the win. Yeah, actually, very much so. This is the thing. For my case, I don't know with Robert and Max, and I'm curious to hear. With my case, the alienator loved to play the victim. She is a victim always, all of her life.
That runs in the family. So with me, I was a victim. So my auntie, one of my aunties, she played victim. My mother, she played the victim. So there was a lot of victim mode going on in the family. So as my kids got older, my daughter, because of the way I was, this is why I was dedicated in healing myself. It rubbed off on my daughter. And my youngest son, he became an abuser. Unfortunately, my eldest son, he was alienated from my side of the family. So it all interlinks with each other. So what I found is the more I'm healing my inner traumas, I've been healing for 7 years, and the work that I'm doing, I hope this has a positive impact on my children.
We're all connected, baby. The work you do, they feel it.
What about you, Robert? Did they play victim, or what kind of character did they play, the alienators?
Well, my parents pretty much had her in checkmate, you know what I mean? And so basically all they did was whenever she tried to make an attempt, they just tried to reinforce that the law was on their side, number one. And number two was that she was a depressed, crazy person, and hopefully you don't become one too.
That's what I got.
That was it.
I got classed as the crazy one. I got classed as the unstable one as well, you know. So it's all patterns. It's all ongoing patterns. So once you recognise them patterns, it's a lot easier to spot.
They're consistent. They are consistent, aren't they? A lot of stories are changed, but the pattern is consistent. And I'll tell you once again, just because it's worth repeating, is the pattern is conditional love. The pattern is conditional love. The pattern is conditional love.
And then the other thing
Jesus, our Heavenly Father, said, become unconditional love. And that's what each one of us are on the journey of. And if you don't already know it, which I think both of you do, and a lot of people listening, you are as well, that's the gift.
So with my case, it's the alienator was always playing the victim. And one thing that Robert was mentioning about how, you know, like he was threatens that he would become one like that monster that they portray, and the same with Max was saying the same thing. So I remember clearly at 5 years old that she was screaming at me saying how my father was a dog and that I have the blood of the dog, and I'm also I was a child. I mean, what did I do for her to, and this is the thing. This is the thing is that a lot of people, especially professionals like judges and lawyers and therapists, don't get is when they see the abuser trying to steal the children and take the children away from the target parents, is they think that, it's the alienators love the children so much. No. They taking the children because they want to win, because they wanted to hurt and harm the target parents. They don't care about the children. The children are simply the tools, the weapons, the toys, the pawn in this whole game that they're playing, and they don't care. And then the reality is when the children are finally in the hand of the alienators don't care about the children. They actually abuse the children.
My parents never stood up for me.
I have a story with my youngest son. His father decided to take me to court, and he tried to rip a hole between me and my 3 children. And I ended up getting sole custody. There was no reason to take me to court whatsoever. And he got parental responsibility. So he got basically Saturday dinner time till Sunday 6 o'clock at night. It lasted for about a week. After that, he was on and off. He didn't stick to the court order. He didn't stick to it at all. And I remember the day of the conclusion, and we'd come out the same exit and gone into the same lift. And he basically said to me, if I didn't get legal aid, I wouldn't have took you to court. It wasn't the fact of the impact that it had on me and the children. It was to have gained control. And that's all it was.
Of course, yeah, it is all about control and winning. And yeah, they don't care about the children. It's not because they love the children so much. And then so when you look at these adult children, and so we have a documentary film called Parental Alienation: The Aftermath. And in this film, we feature a number of adult children of parental alienation. It's essentially like what you are watching right now. It's the story of these children unfolding, and when they become adults, and the impact of how being alienated as a child, how it translates into all aspects of their lives. And actually, these are all really traumatic, and even the very successful ones, it's still devastating stories. Even people that you would consider like successful people in society, but when they were alienated as a child and become an adult, yeah, it's still horrible. So what was my point? My point is that okay, I lost my point, I'm sorry. But anyway, so we have a documentary film, and that is coming out. Oh yes, I remember my point now. So when I did this film and I look at these children's lives, I realized that every single one of them, the alienators took them and got the custody either illegally or legally. So some of them are abducted from their parent and took away to a different state, and the other parent could never find them. And some are legally, as in like the legal system helped them because of false allegation or whatever. But at the end of the day, is that once they have the child, they abuse the child, they neglect the child. There's no love there, there's no care there. So these children growing up with horrible situations. So even if you take the fact that they lose one half of their life aside, like if you take that aside, this half that they got left is completely dysfunctional, and it's so toxic. The environment, these children, every one of them, the environment
based in conditional love. Is what it is. Going to be based in conditional love.
I'm based in the UK, Petra, and I'm in Manchester. I'm not sure if you're aware of it. My eldest son, he got moved to Wales, which is right across. So I had no way of getting in touch with him whatsoever from the age of him being 18. So they moved my son out of the area where I was.
Yeah, and that's the situation. They make it impossible for talented parents to. Oh God, I see Jennifer's question in the chat. Yeah, in the long run, I feel like we had no chance, and yeah, sometimes it does feel like it's helpless, and it feel like hopeless. But actually, it's not. It doesn't have to be that way. It's actually possible. So one of the things that I really wanted to do is to help parents that still have contact to reverse it, because while you still have contact, your chance of reversing is a lot higher. So if you do have contact, there's so much that you could do. And then if you don't have contact, I want you to still do things that you can either reach out or still keeping in touch somehow, that you can still project yourself in a way that somehow still save your children later. So, don't give up
like
hope.
That website that your father made. Just like that website your father made. I'm still
exactly
blessed by that story.
Exactly.